7 candles flickered on a chocolate cake. Carlos watched his daughter Zoe close her eyes, her small hands pressed together in a silent wish. This was supposed to be their perfect night. Just the two of them celebrating her 7th birthday in a cozy Italian restaurant. The door swung open. Cold air rushed in. Carlos looked up and felt his chest tighten. His ex-wife Diana stood in the entrance, her fingers intertwined with those of a tall man in a tailored suit. She had said she couldn't come tonight, yet here she was, with someone else. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to say thank you. Whether you're listening from New York, London, Manila, or somewhere I've never even heard of, it means the world that you're here. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd love to know. And if this story touches your heart, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. Now let's get back to Carlos and his daughter's birthday. Carlos had ironed his shirt twice that morning. The first time, he left a crease near the collar that bothered him so much he started over. It was a simple blue button-down, the nicest thing in his closet, reserved for parent-teacher conferences and the occasional job interview. Today, it would serve a more important purpose. Today, his little girl was turning 7. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to smooth down a stubborn patch of hair that refused to cooperate. The face staring back at him showed the toll of the past year and a half. Tired eyes, a jaw that clenched too often, hands that were rough and calloused from years of working with wood, but still gentle enough to braid a little girl's hair every morning before school. From down the hall, he heard Zoe's alarm clock begin to chime. Carlos had been awake since 5:30, practicing butterfly-shaped pancakes from a video he'd watched the night before. The first 3 attempts looked like lumpy clouds. The 4th finally resembled something with wings. He arranged them on her favorite purple plate, stuck a single candle in the center, and waited outside her bedroom door. When Zoe emerged, still rubbing sleep from her eyes, her face transformed into pure joy. "Daddy, you made me butterfly pancakes!" She blew out the candle right there in the hallway, squeezing her eyes so tight that little wrinkles formed across her nose. Carlos wondered what she wished for. He hoped it was something within his power to give. New colored pencils, a trip to the zoo, anything but the one thing he knew she wanted most. Their apartment was small but full of love. 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor of an old building where the heating sometimes failed in winter and the neighbors played music too loud on weekends. Carlos had done everything he could to make it feel like home for Zoe. He painted her room lavender because she said it was the color of dreams. He hung fairy lights around her window so she would never be afraid of the dark. He built her a bookshelf shaped like a tree, each branch holding her favorite stories. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The divorce had been finalized a year and a half ago, though the unraveling began long before any papers were signed. It started with a phone call, Diana's voice shaking on the other end of the line, telling him that her mother had been diagnosed with late-stage cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months, maybe less. Diana had to go. Her mother lived 500 miles away, alone, with no one else to care for her. Carlos understood. Of course he understood, but he couldn't follow. His carpentry business depended on local contracts, relationships he had spent years building. He was the only one bringing in steady income. If he left, they would lose everything. So Diana went alone. They tried to make the distance work. Phone calls every night after Zoe went to bed. Video chats on weekends where they would prop up their phones and pretend they were having dinner together. For the first few months, they still said, "I love you," before hanging up. They still made plans for when she would come home. But 8 months of separation has a way of wearing people down. Diana was exhausted from watching her mother fade away, from the endless hospital visits and sleepless nights. Carlos was exhausted from raising Zoe alone while keeping his business afloat, from being both father and mother and somehow never feeling like enough. Slowly, the phone calls grew shorter. The "I love you" became "talk tomorrow." The plans for reunion became vague and distant. pushed further into a future neither of them could see clearly. When Diana's mother finally passed, something had already died between them too. She moved back to the city a few weeks later. Carlos remembered the day she came to pick up the rest of her things. They stood in the living room they had once shared, surrounded by boxes and silence. Neither of them shouted. Neither of them cried. They simply looked at each other and acknowledged what they both already knew. "I still love you," Diana had said quietly. "But I don't know how to be your wife anymore." Carlos had nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He wanted to fight for her. He wanted to beg her to stay, to try again, to remember what they had before everything fell apart. But he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight she was carrying, and he knew that asking her to stay would only break her further. So he let her go. They agreed on shared custody. Alternate weeks, holidays split evenly. Everything arranged with the precision of two people trying very hard to be civilized. Diana took a nursing job at the community hospital, working night shifts so she could spend days with Zoe during her weeks. Carlos never stopped loving her. He kept this truth locked away in a place he never visited. He didn't speak about it to friends. He didn't let it show during their brief exchanges at the doorstep, when they handed Zoe back and forth. He trained himself not to notice the way Diana's hair caught the light, or how her laugh still sounded exactly the same as it did on their first date. Loving her from a distance had become another kind of work. Invisible, exhausting, necessary. On the morning of Zoe's birthday, Carlos checked his phone while she was getting dressed. A message from Diana waited on the screen. "I can't make it to dinner tonight. I need to prepare something important. I'm sorry. Kiss Zoe for me." Something important. Carlos read the words 3 times, searching for meaning between the lines. He wanted to ask what was more important than their daughter's birthday. He wanted to call her and hear the explanation in her voice. But their relationship had become a careful dance of boundaries, and he had learned not to cross the invisible lines. He typed back a simple response. "I'll tell her. Hope everything goes well." Then he put the phone away and focused on making the day special enough for both of them. That afternoon, while Zoe was watching cartoons, Carlos went to tidy her room. He picked up scattered crayons and straightened the blankets on her bed. As he fluffed her pillow, a folded piece of paper slipped out from underneath. It was a brochure for the Riverside Children's Art Center. Carlos recognized it immediately. Zoe had mentioned this place months ago, her eyes shining with that particular light children get when they discover something that speaks to their soul. "They teach you how to paint like real artists, Daddy, with real canvases and everything. Maybe one day I can go there." He had changed the subject then, pretending to be distracted by something on the stove. He didn't know how to tell her that one day might never come. The tuition was listed on the back of the brochure. $3,000 per year. More than he could spare after rent, utilities, groceries, and the endless small expenses that came with raising a child alone. Carlos stared at the brochure for a long moment. Then he folded it carefully and slid it back under her pillow, exactly where she had hidden it. Some dreams had to wait. That evening, he helped Zoe into her favorite yellow dress, the one with tiny sunflowers embroidered along the hem. She twirled in front of the mirror, watching the skirt spin around her legs. "Do I look pretty, Daddy?" "You look beautiful, baby girl. The most beautiful 7-year-old in the whole world." She beamed at him, and for a moment, Carlos forgot about all the things he couldn't give her. In that smile, in that simple joy, everything felt like enough. The drive to the restaurant took 15 minutes. Carlos had chosen this place deliberately. It was a small Italian spot on Maple Street, nothing fancy, with red checkered tablecloths and candles stuffed into old wine bottles. The kind of place where the waitress called everyone honey and the bread baskets were always overflowing. It was also the place where he had proposed to Diana 8 years ago. He didn't know why he kept coming back here. Maybe he was punishing himself. Maybe he was holding on to something that should have been let go long ago. Or maybe this restaurant, with all its memories, was the only place that still felt like the family they used to be. Zoe slid into the corner booth, her legs swinging freely because her feet couldn't reach the floor. She studied the menu with intense concentration, even though Carlos knew she would order the same thing she always did. "Daddy, do you think Mommy is thinking about me right now?" The question came out of nowhere, soft and tentative. Carlos reached across the table and covered her small hand with his. "I know she is, sweetheart. Mommy always thinks about you. Even when she can't be here, you're always in her heart." Zoe nodded slowly, accepting this answer the way children accept things they don't fully understand, but choose to believe anyway. The waitress brought out the cake Carlos had ordered in advance. Chocolate with purple icing, just the way Zoe liked it. 7 candles arranged in a careful circle. The staff gathered around the table, and the familiar melody of Happy Birthday filled the small restaurant. Carlos watched his daughter's face glow in the candlelight. She looked so much like her mother in that moment. The same wide eyes, the same gentle curve of her smile, the same way she pressed her hands together when she was about to make a wish. Zoe closed her eyes. The restaurant door swung open. A gust of cold air cut through the warmth. Carlos turned instinctively, and everything inside him went still. Diana stood in the doorway. She was wearing the green dress he had always loved, the one that made her eyes look like sea glass. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked beautiful. She looked nervous, and she was not alone. A man stood beside her, tall and polished in a charcoal suit. His hand rested on the small of her back with an ease that spoke of familiarity. He leaned close to whisper something in her ear, and Diana nodded, a small smile crossing her lips. Carlos couldn't breathe. She said she had something important to do. She said she couldn't come tonight. And yet here she was, walking into their restaurant, with another man's hand on her body like it belonged there. Zoe's eyes flew open. "Mommy!" The word broke the spell. Diana's gaze snapped to the corner booth, and for one unguarded second, Carlos saw something flicker across her face. Surprise? Guilt. The panic of someone caught in a moment they weren't ready to explain. She recovered quickly, her expression smoothing into a bright smile as she walked toward the table. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. I wanted to surprise you." But Carlos barely heard her. His eyes were fixed on the man following behind her. The silver watch on his wrist. The confident way he moved. The way he looked at Diana like she was something precious. Zoe was smiling now, confused but happy to see her mother. She didn't notice her father's white-knuckled grip on the edge of the table. She didn't see the way his jaw had tightened, or how he was forcing every muscle in his face to remain neutral. She said she couldn't come because of something important, and now Carlos understood. This man was the important thing. Everything he had been holding together for the past year and a half, all the careful walls he had built around his heart, began to crack. But he didn't let it show. He would not ruin his daughter's birthday. He would not let Zoe see him break. So Carlos smiled, even as something inside him shattered into pieces too small to ever put back together. Carlos stood up from the booth. His legs felt unsteady beneath him, but he forced himself to move with calm precision. He nodded once at Diana, a gesture so controlled it barely qualified as acknowledgement, then turned his attention to the man beside her. "Carlos," he said, extending his hand. His voice came out flat, professional, the voice he used with difficult clients. The man shook it firmly. "Elliot, it's nice to finally meet you. Diana has told me a lot about you." Finally, the word lodged itself in Carlos's chest like a splinter. How long had this been going on? How many conversations had Diana and this man shared about him, about their family, about things that should have remained private? "Has she?" Carlos replied. It wasn't a question. Diana stepped forward quickly, her smile too bright, her movements too eager. She kissed Zoe on the forehead and settled into the booth beside her daughter, pulling her close. "I'm so sorry I'm late, baby. I had a surprise to prepare, and it took longer than I expected." Zoe wrapped her arms around her mother's neck. "I knew you would come, Mommy. I knew it." Carlos watched them embrace, his daughter's face buried in Diana's shoulder, and felt something twist inside him. He should be happy that Zoe was happy. He should be grateful that Diana had shown up after all. Instead, all he could see was Elliot standing at the edge of the table, watching this intimate family moment like he belonged there. "I'm going to step outside for a minute," Carlos said. "I need some air." He didn't wait for a response. He walked past the other diners, past the waitress carrying a tray of pasta, past the chalkboard menu he had memorized years ago. The door swung shut behind him, and the cold night air hit his face like a slap. Carlos leaned against the brick wall of the restaurant, his breath coming out in visible puffs. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to his friend Jerome. "Diana showed up with some guy. I don't know what to do." The response came 30 seconds later. "What do you mean, some guy? Like a boyfriend?" Carlos stared at the screen. His thumbs hovered over the keyboard, but he didn't know how to answer. He didn't know anything anymore. Inside the restaurant, Diana noticed the empty space where Carlos had been sitting. She watched the door swing closed behind him and felt her stomach tighten with guilt. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. She had planned everything so carefully. The timing, the explanation, the reveal. But seeing Carlos's face when he looked at Elliot, seeing the way his jaw locked and his eyes went cold, she realized she had made a terrible mistake. Elliot touched her shoulder gently. "He thinks we're together." Diana nodded, not trusting her voice. "You need to explain," Elliot continued, "before this gets worse." "I know, I didn't expect him to be so..." "Hurt?" Diana looked at her daughter, who was now happily examining the purple icing on her birthday cake, oblivious to the tension surrounding her. "I thought I was over feeling guilty," Diana whispered. "I thought we had both moved on." Elliot didn't respond. He simply stood beside her, the way he had stood beside her for the past 15 years of their friendship, through every heartbreak and triumph and ordinary Tuesday in between. Outside, Carlos was still staring at his phone when the restaurant door opened. He looked up, expecting Diana. Instead, it was Elliot. The two men regarded each other in the amber glow of the streetlight. "Mind if I join you?" Elliot asked. Carlos shrugged. He didn't have the energy to refuse. Elliot leaned against the wall a few feet away, his hands in his pockets. Up close, Carlos noticed details he had missed before. The fine lines around Elliot's eyes, the slight gray at his temples, the way he held himself with a quiet confidence that wasn't arrogance, just self-assurance. "Diana didn't tell you I was coming," Elliot said. It wasn't a question. "No, that was my fault. I told her to keep it a surprise. I thought..." He shook his head. "I didn't think about how it would look." Carlos crossed his arms over his chest. "How long have you two been together?" The question came out sharper than he intended. He could hear the jealousy in his own voice, and he hated himself for it. He had no right to be jealous. Diana wasn't his wife anymore. She was free to be with whoever she wanted, but knowing that didn't stop the feeling from burning in his chest. Elliot turned to look at him directly. There was something in his expression that Carlos couldn't read. Sympathy, maybe, or understanding. "We're not together," Elliot said quietly. "Not in the way you're thinking. And honestly, Diana's not exactly my type." Carlos frowned, confused. Elliot gave a small, knowing smile. "My husband would probably object if I started dating women at this point. We've been married for 12 years. The words took a moment to register. Carlos blinked. "Your husband?" His name is David. He wanted to come tonight, actually, but someone had to stay home with our dog. She's recovering from surgery." Elliot pulled out his phone and showed Carlos a photo of himself with another man, both of them smiling, a golden retriever between them. "Diana's been my best friend since college. 20 years now. I was there when she got her first nursing job. I was there when she married you. I was there when her mother died, and she called me at 3 in the morning because she couldn't stop crying." Carlos absorbed this information slowly. The tight knot in his chest began to loosen, but it was replaced by something else. Confusion, embarrassment, and underneath it all, a flicker of relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. "She never told me you were close," Carlos said. "She didn't tell you a lot of things." Elliot's voice was gentle, not accusatory. Not because she was hiding them, because she didn't know how to talk about the hard stuff, especially not with you. "What's that supposed to mean?" Elliot looked up at the sky, where a few stars were visible through the haze of city lights. When Diana moved back after her mother passed, she was in a bad place. Really bad. "There were nights when I was genuinely afraid for her. She felt like she had failed at everything. Failed to save her mother. Failed to save her marriage. Failed to be the kind of person you and Zoe deserved." Carlos felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I didn't know it was that serious. She didn't want you to know. She thought you had enough to deal with. Raising Zoe alone, running your business. She didn't want to add her broken pieces to your plate." They stood in silence for a moment. Inside the restaurant, Carlos could hear the muffled sounds of other diners laughing, glasses clinking, life continuing as normal. "Why are you telling me this?" Carlos finally asked. Elliot turned back to face him. "Because I've watched Diana carry this weight for 2 years, and I've watched her never stop loving you, even when she convinced herself she had to let you go. Tonight was supposed to be a good thing. She's been planning it for months. But she's terrible at explaining her feelings, and I'm even worse at reading a room." Before Carlos could respond, the restaurant door burst open. Diana stepped outside, her face pale. "Carlos, something's wrong with Zoe." All other thoughts vanished. Carlos pushed past Elliot and rushed back inside, his heart pounding. Zoe was standing by the table, her face streaked with tears. When she saw her father, she ran toward him and threw her arms around his legs, sobbing. "Baby, what happened? What's wrong?" The words came out between hiccups and gasps. I heard Mommy talking. She said she's going to move away. She's leaving. She's leaving and never coming back." Carlos knelt down, so he was at eye level with his daughter. Her small body was shaking, her breaths coming in ragged bursts. "Zoe, sweetheart, calm down. Tell me exactly what you heard." Diana had followed them inside. She stood frozen a few feet away, her hand over her mouth. "I heard her on the phone," Zoe cried. "She said everything is ready. She said after tonight she's going to move. She's going away, Daddy. She's going to leave us just like before." Carlos looked up at Diana. Her eyes were red, threatening to spill over. "That's not... Zoe, baby, that's not what I meant." But Zoe wasn't listening. She buried her face in Carlos's chest, her small fingers clutching his shirt so hard it hurt. "I don't want Mommy to go. I don't want her to leave again. It's all my fault. It's because of my birthday. I made everyone sad." The words hit Carlos like a physical blow. His 7-year-old daughter, on her birthday, believing that she was the cause of her parents' pain. He held her tighter, one hand cradling the back of her head. "No, baby, no, none of this is your fault. Do you hear me? None of it." Diana stepped forward and knelt beside them both. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice was steady. "Zoe, look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, Zoe lifted her head. Her eyes were red and swollen, her cheeks wet. "I'm not leaving you," Diana said. "I would never leave you. When I said I was moving, I meant I was moving my work schedule. I'm going to switch from night shifts to day shifts, so I can spend more time with you." So I can take you to school and pick you up and be there when you need me." Zoe stared at her mother, confusion and hope warring on her small face. "You're not going away?" "No, baby. I'm staying right here. I will always stay right here." The little girl looked at her father, seeking confirmation. Carlos nodded. "Mommy's not going anywhere, sweetheart. She loves you more than anything in the world." Zoe's lower lip trembled. Then she reached out and grabbed Diana's hand, pulling her mother into the embrace. For a moment, the three of them stayed like that, huddled together on the floor of a small Italian restaurant, while other diners pretended not to watch. Carlos could feel Diana's shoulder pressed against his. He could smell her shampoo, the same lavender scent she had used for years. Her fingers brushed against his arm as she held their daughter, and the touch sent electricity through his skin. He had spent a year and a half training himself not to feel this way. It took less than a minute to undo all of it. When Zoe's sobs finally quieted, Diana pulled back and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "There's something else I need to tell you both," she said. "Something I should have explained from the beginning." She reached into her purse and pulled out a white envelope. "Zoe, do you remember the art center you told me about? The one where they teach children to paint on real canvases?" Zoe's eyes widened. She nodded slowly. Diana placed the envelope in her daughter's hands. "Open it." Zoe's fingers fumbled with the seal. Inside was a folded letter and a glossy brochure that Carlos recognized immediately. The Riverside Children's Art Center, the same brochure he had found under her pillow that afternoon. "I've been working extra shifts for 6 months," Diana said. "Every night shift, every holiday I could pick up. I saved enough for a full year of tuition. And Elliot—" She looked over her shoulder at the man who had quietly returned and was now standing by the door. "Elliot runs the art center. He agreed to put you in their advanced program, even though you're younger than most of the students, because I showed him your drawings, and he said you have real talent." Zoe stared at the letter, then at her mother, then at Elliot, then back at the letter. "I get to go to art school? You get to go to art school." The scream of joy that erupted from Zoe's lungs was so loud that every head in the restaurant turned. She threw her arms around Diana's neck, then around Carlos's neck, then ran across the room to hug Elliot's legs, even though she had only met him an hour ago. Carlos stayed on the floor for a moment longer, the pieces finally clicking into place. The mysterious message about something important. The secrecy. The man at Diana's side. It had never been what he thought. It had never been about replacing him. It had been about Zoe. It had always been about Zoe. He looked up at Diana, who was watching their daughter dance around the restaurant in uncontainable joy. "You worked night shifts for 6 months," he said quietly. "All those times you said you were too tired to talk. All those dark circles under your eyes." Diana met his gaze. "I wanted to give her something she couldn't get any other way. Something that would make her believe that dreams can come true." Carlos stood up slowly. His legs still felt unsteady, but for a different reason now. "Why didn't you tell me? I could have helped. I could have—" "You've been doing everything alone for 2 years," Diana interrupted gently. "Taking care of her, providing for her, being everything she needs. I wanted to do something on my own. I wanted to prove that I could still be a good mother, even if I couldn't be a good wife." The words hung between them. Carlos felt the walls he had built, the ones that had held him together for so long, begin to crumble. Across the room, Zoe was showing Elliot her butterfly pancake technique, her earlier tears completely forgotten. The waitress was bringing out extra bread, charmed by the little girl's enthusiasm. The restaurant had returned to its normal rhythm, as if the crisis of the past hour had never happened. Diana stepped closer to Carlos. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't come here to hurt you. I came here to surprise Zoe. But I think I ended up hurting you anyway." and I'm sorry." Carlos shook his head. "You didn't hurt me. I hurt myself. I saw you with Elliot, and I assumed the worst because—" He stopped, searching for words. "Because I've been waiting for you to move on. I've been waiting for the day you find someone else and I have to pretend to be happy about it. And when I thought that day had come, I realized I'm not ready. I don't think I'll ever be ready." Diana's breath caught in her throat. "Carlos, I know we're not together anymore. I know I don't have any right to feel this way. But I need you to know that I never stopped." "Daddy! Mommy! Come look!" Zoe's voice cut through the moment. She was waving at them from across the room, holding up a piece of paper she had been drawing on with borrowed crayons. Carlos and Diana exchanged a glance. Whatever had been about to be said dissolved into the air, unfinished. They walked over to their daughter together. Zoe proudly displayed her artwork. It was a simple drawing done in crayon on a napkin. 3 figures holding hands. A tall one on the left labeled Daddy in crooked letters, a tall one on the right labeled Mommy, and a smaller one in the middle labeled Me. "It's our family," Zoe announced. Carlos felt his throat tighten. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Diana knelt down beside Zoe, studying the drawing with serious attention. "Is this what you wished for when you blew out your candles?" Zoe shook her head. "No. I can't tell you what I wished for, or it won't come true." She looked at the drawing again, then back at her parents with an expression that seemed far too old for 7 years. "But this isn't a wish. This is what's real. Even if you and Daddy don't live together anymore, in my heart, we're still a family, right?" Neither Carlos nor Diana could speak. Zoe took their silence as uncertainty. Her small face grew serious. "I know you got divorced. I'm not a baby. I understand that you're not married anymore." She pressed the drawing into Carlos's hands. "But that doesn't mean we're not a family. I don't need you to get back together. I just need you to not hate each other. Can you do that?" Carlos looked at Diana. Diana looked at Carlos. 1.5 years of careful distance. 1.5 years of polite exchanges and avoided glances and feelings, stuffed so deep they had almost suffocated. And now their 7-year-old daughter was asking them for the one thing they had both been too afraid to offer. "We don't hate each other, baby," Diana said softly. "We never did." "Your mother is right," Carlos added. "We could never hate each other. Not when we both love you so much." Zoe considered this for a moment. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good. Now can we eat cake? I'm hungry." The tension broke. Diana laughed, a sound that Carlos hadn't heard in almost 2 years. It was like hearing a song he had forgotten he loved. "Yes," Diana said. "Let's eat cake." They returned to the booth together. The chocolate cake sat in the center of the table. Its 7 candles now melted stubs in a pool of purple icing. Zoe didn't seem to mind. She climbed into her seat and pulled the cake toward her, already reaching for the knife. "I want the corner piece with the most frosting," she announced. Carlos sat down across from her. Diana slid into the seat beside their daughter. Elliot remained standing by the edge of the table, watching the scene with a quiet smile. "I should probably go," Elliot said. "This seems like a family moment." Zoe looked up sharply. "But you're part of the surprise, Uncle Elliot. You have to stay and eat cake with us." The title came out naturally, as if Zoe had already decided that this stranger belonged in her world. Carlos noticed the way Elliot's expression softened at the word uncle. "I don't want to intrude," Elliot said, glancing at Carlos. Carlos surprised himself with his response. "Stay. You came all this way for Zoe's birthday. The least we can do is give you some cake." Elliot hesitated for only a moment, before pulling up a chair from a nearby table. He sat at the end of the booth, completing the strange new geometry of this evening. Diana cut the cake into careful slices. She gave Zoe the corner piece as promised, then served Carlos, then Elliot, before taking a small slice for herself. The chocolate was rich and sweet, but Carlos barely tasted it. His mind was still processing everything that had happened in the past hour. "So you run an art center," Carlos said to Elliot. It wasn't quite an olive branch, but it was something. Elliot nodded. "Started it about 8 years ago with my husband David. Mostly we work with kids who don't have access to traditional art education. Zoe's drawings caught my attention the first time Diana showed them to me. She has a real eye for color. She gets that from her mother." The words came out before Carlos could stop them. Diana looked up, surprised. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment the busy restaurant around them faded into background noise. Zoe, oblivious to the undercurrents, was happily smearing frosting on her nose. "Daddy, when do I start art school?" Carlos looked at Diana for the answer. "Next month," Diana said. "Classes are on Saturday mornings. I'll be the one taking you since I'm switching to day shifts." "Can Daddy come too sometimes?" The innocent question hung in the air. Carlos and Diana both hesitated. "I don't see why not," Diana finally said. "If Daddy wants to." "I'd like that," Carlos replied quietly. Zoe beamed, as if she had just received another birthday present. She went back to demolishing her cake, unaware that she had just brokered a small peace treaty between her parents. The waitress came by to refill water glasses. She smiled at the table, clearly charmed by the little girl with frosting on her face. "Is this a birthday party?" "Happy birthday, sweetheart." "Thank you," Zoe said politely. "My mommy gave me art school for my birthday, and my daddy made me butterfly pancakes this morning." "Well, aren't you lucky to have such wonderful parents?" Zoe nodded solemnly. "I know." When the waitress left, Diana reached into her bag and pulled out a small cardboard box. "I almost forgot. There's one more thing." She placed the box on the table. It was tied with a purple ribbon. "What is it?" Zoe asked, her eyes wide. "Open it and see." Zoe untied the ribbon with eager fingers. Inside the box was a second cake, much smaller than the first. It was clearly homemade, the frosting slightly uneven, decorated with strawberries arranged in the shape of a heart. "I know you like strawberry better than chocolate," Diana said, "so I made this one myself. I'm not much of a baker, but I wanted to give you something that came from my own hands, not just my wallet." Zoe stared at the cake with an expression that Carlos had never seen before. It was the look of a child who understood, perhaps for the first time, that love could take many different forms. "You made this for me?" "Every bit of it. The frosting took me 3 tries. I hope it tastes okay." Zoe threw her arms around Diana's neck. "I love it, Mommy. I love it so much." Diana held her daughter close, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Carlos watched them embrace. Something shifted inside him, a loosening of the knot that had been tightening in his chest since the divorce. Diana was still the woman he had fallen in love with. Still the woman who would work double shifts to give their daughter a dream. Still the woman who would bake a lopsided cake at midnight because she wanted Zoe to know she was loved. The divorce hadn't changed any of that. Maybe it was possible to love someone without being married to them. Maybe it was possible to be a family without sharing a home. "We should light the candles," Carlos said. Diana looked at him. "There are no candles on this one. I forgot to buy them." Carlos reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box of birthday candles. He had bought extras, just in case. "I've got you covered." Their fingers brushed as he handed her the box. Neither of them pulled away. Diana placed 7 candles on the strawberry cake, and the waitress, who had been hovering nearby, offered to light them. Once again, the staff gathered around the table. Once again, the familiar melody of Happy Birthday filled the restaurant. Zoe closed her eyes and made her second wish of the evening. When she blew out the candles, Carlos could have sworn he saw her glance at both her parents before opening her eyes. "What did you wish for this time?" Diana asked. Zoe shook her head firmly. Can't tell. It won't come true. Fair enough. Elliot stood up from his chair. I really should be going now. Early flight tomorrow. David's waiting up for me. Zoe scrambled out of the booth and wrapped her arms around his waist. Thank you for my art school, Uncle Elliot. I'm going to be the best painter in the whole class. Elliot knelt down to her level. I don't doubt that for a second. I'll see you at orientation next month, okay? David might come too. He makes really good cookies. Okay. He straightened up and shook Carlos's hand again. This time, the gesture felt genuine. Take care of them, Elliot said quietly. Both of them. Carlos nodded. He didn't need to ask what Elliot meant. Diana walked Elliot to the door. They exchanged a few words that Carlos couldn't hear, and then Elliot was gone, disappearing into the cold night outside. Diana stood at the entrance for a moment, watching him go before turning back to the table. The restaurant was beginning to empty. Other families were gathering their coats and paying their checks. The waitress was clearing tables with practiced efficiency. Carlos looked at his watch. It was almost 9 o'clock. Zoe should have been in bed an hour ago. We should get going, he said. It's way past someone's bedtime. Zoe predictably protested. But I'm not tired. I don't want the party to end. All good things have to end, sweetheart. That's what makes them special. Diana began gathering the leftover cake into takeout boxes. Carlos counted out bills for the check. Their movements were coordinated, unconscious, the muscle memory of two people who had once shared a life. When everything was packed up, they walked out of the restaurant together. The night air was crisp and cold, carrying the faint smell of approaching winter. Zoe held both their hands, swinging between them like she used to do when she was 3 years old. This was the best birthday ever, she declared. Yeah? Carlos smiled down at her. Better than the one where we went to the water park? Way better, because both of you were here. Carlos felt Diana's fingers tighten around Zoe's hand. They walked in silence to the parking lot, where their cars were parked side by side. Zoe ran ahead to look at something on the ground. A caterpillar, maybe, or an interesting rock. She crouched down to examine it, giving her parents a moment alone. Diana spoke first. I'm sorry about tonight, about all of it. I should have told you about Elliot. I should have explained the surprise instead of just showing up. Carlos shook his head. Don't apologize. You did something incredible for Zoe. I'm the one who jumped to conclusions. You had every right to be upset. If I saw you walk in with some woman I'd never met, I probably would have reacted the same way. They stood in the dim glow of the parking lot lights, close enough to touch, but not quite touching. There's something I started to say earlier, Carlos began, before Zoe interrupted us. Diana waited. I never stopped loving you. The words came out quiet but steady. I know that might be strange to hear. I know we're divorced, and we've both been trying to move on. But I can't pretend anymore. This past year and a half, I've been going through the motions, telling myself that the feelings would fade if I just ignored them long enough. They haven't. They won't. Diana's eyes glistened in the streetlight. I don't know what to do with that information, Carlos continued. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know, because life is short, and we spent too much time not talking about the things that mattered. Diana reached up and touched his face. Her fingers were cold from the night air, but the gesture was warm. I never stopped loving you either, she whispered. That was the hardest part, knowing that I still loved you, but not knowing how to be with you without falling apart. After my mother died, I was so broken, Carlos. I couldn't ask you to carry that weight on top of everything else you were already carrying. You didn't have to carry it alone. I know that now. I didn't know it then. Zoe looked up from her examination of the ground. Mommy, Daddy, are you talking about grown-up stuff? They both laughed, the tension breaking into something lighter. Yes, baby, Diana said. Very boring grown-up stuff. Okay. Tell me when you're done. She went back to whatever had captured her attention. Carlos looked at Diana. "So what do we do now?" "I don't know. I don't think we can go back to what we were." "What if we don't try to go back? What if we try something new?" Diana tilted her head. "Like what?" "Like being a family. Not the way we were before, but the way Zoe described. Two people who love each other, who love their daughter, who choose to be kind to each other even when it's hard." "That sounds almost like dating." "Maybe it is. Maybe we start from scratch. No assumptions, no expectations, just two people trying to figure out if they still fit together." Diana was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. A real smile. The one that had made Carlos fall in love with her a decade ago. "I think I'd like that." Zoe came running back, holding something in her cupped hands. "Look, Daddy! Look, Mommy! I found a ladybug!" They both leaned in to examine the tiny creature crawling across her palm. Its red shell gleamed under the parking lot lights. "That's good luck," Carlos said. "Did you know that? Ladybugs are good luck." "Really?" "Really. You should make a wish on it." Zoe closed her eyes tight, concentrating hard. Then she opened them and gently placed the ladybug on a nearby bush. "What did you wish for?" Diana asked. Zoe looked at her parents with that same too-old expression she had worn earlier in the restaurant. "I don't need to tell you this one, because it already came true." She reached out and took both their hands again, pulling them together so that Carlos and Diana's fingers intertwined above her head. Carlos looked at Diana. Diana looked at Carlos. Neither of them let go. The night was cold and the hour was late. But for the first time since the divorce, Carlos felt something he had forgotten was possible. Hope. Not the hope of going back to what they had. That was gone. And perhaps it was never meant to last forever. But the hope of something new. Something that could grow from the broken pieces of their past into a shape they hadn't imagined yet. A family that didn't live under the same roof but shared the same heart. "Come on," Carlos said. "Let's get you home before you turn into a pumpkin." Zoe giggled. "I don't want to be a pumpkin." "Then we better hurry." He lifted her into his arms, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her head resting on his shoulder. Diana walked beside them to his car. And when he buckled Zoe into the back seat, she was already half asleep, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the evening. "I'll follow you home," Diana said. "Make sure you get there safe." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "That's my line." "Maybe it's both our lines now," he smiled. "Maybe it is." Diana got into her car, and Carlos got into his. They pulled out of the parking lot in a small convoy, two vehicles carrying 3 people who were learning, slowly, how to be a family again. In the back seat, Zoe murmured in her half-sleep, "Best birthday ever." Carlos looked at her in the rearview mirror. Then he looked at the headlights of Diana's car, following steadily behind. "Yeah, baby girl," he said softly. "It really was." And that's the end of Carlos and Zoe's story. But before you go, I want to leave you with this. Love doesn't always keep us together. Sometimes life gets in the way. Sometimes we break. Sometimes we lose what matters most. But if we let it, love can still keep us kind to each other. It can teach us to heal. It can show us that family isn't about sharing a roof. It's about sharing a heart. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll hit that subscribe button. I'd love to have you here for the next one. And hey, drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from tonight? What part of this story hit home for you? I read every single comment, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, take care of the people you love, and don't forget to tell them.